A racist teacher sends a black student to the back of the class and purposely gives him lower grades than he deserves. She is shocked when the principal overhears her racist words. The bell echoed through the school halls, signaling the start of Malik Andrews's last class of the day. He made his way to his usual seat at the back of Mrs. Langston's history class, feeling the all-too-familiar mix of tension and hope that today, maybe today, things might be different. He glanced around the room, watching his classmates settle in their seats, the easy smiles and laughter as they swapped jokes and whispered about weekend plans. Mrs. Langston's stern voice cut through the noise as she walked to the front of the room, clipboard in hand, her eyes scanning the class with her usual air of authority. She was the kind of teacher who left no room for mistakes or excuses. Her strictness wasn't a problem in itself. Malik respected teachers who pushed their students to excel, but with Mrs. Langston, something felt off. Every time he turned in an assignment, he felt he was being graded on something other than the quality of his work. "All right, everyone," Mrs. Langston began, "I've graded your history reports on key figures of the civil rights movement. Some of you did excellent work. I was especially impressed with Madison, Liam, and Chloe. Your reports showed a clear understanding of the material." She glanced pointedly at Malik. Unfortunately, others seemed to struggle with basic research and analysis. Malik shifted uncomfortably, gripping his notebook. He'd spent hours on his report, researching not only the main events, but trying to capture the essence of the struggles and triumphs of the people involved. He even stayed late at the library to make sure he got everything right. His mother always told him to put his best effort into everything he did, and he took that advice seriously. "Malik, would you please come up and collect your report?" Mrs. Langston's voice was tight, almost like a challenge. He walked to the front of the room, ignoring the curious stares of his classmates. She handed him the paper, her face expressionless, as she tilted her head slightly, eyeing him like he was a puzzle she couldn't quite piece together. When he glanced down at his grade, his heart sank. A C. He read the comment she'd scribbled beneath it. Lacks depth and clarity. Needs improvement. "Is there a problem, Malik?" Mrs. Langston's tone was calm, but her words had an edge to them, a challenge disguised as politeness. Malik looked up, trying to keep his voice steady. "I just thought I did well, that's all. I put in a lot of time." Mrs. Langston's expression didn't soften. Effort is one thing, but quality is another. Just because you tried doesn't mean it was good enough. The words hit him harder than he wanted to admit. Malik knew she hadn't given this same speech to any other student. Liam, who was often praised for the most basic observations, had received an A, even though he'd been one of the ones whispering in the back of the library while Malik pored over his research. But, in Mrs. Langston's eyes, Liam's work was somehow more valuable, more insightful. Malik returned to his seat, staring at his paper as Mrs. Langston moved on with the lesson, her voice droning on about historical events he couldn't bring himself to care about at that moment. He felt the sting of frustration, the burning sense that something wasn't right. He'd heard about kids being unfairly graded, but he'd never thought it would happen to him. At least, not like this. As the class ended, Mrs. Langston paused, her gaze falling on Malik again. "And Malik, if you need help, I recommend you come see me after school. There's no shame in asking for assistance if you're struggling." The implication was clear. She didn't believe he was capable of understanding the material on his own. He nodded, muttering a quiet, "Okay," before slipping his report into his backpack. The last thing he wanted was more time with her scrutinizing gaze, but he knew he couldn't keep ignoring this. He couldn't keep his head down forever. Something had to change. He just didn't know how to make that happen yet. As Malik walked out of class, he felt the weight of the paper in his bag, a constant reminder of the low grade she had handed him without a second thought. It wasn't fair, but he wasn't ready to let her see him give up. Malik slouched against the wall outside the school, waiting for his friend Caleb to finish basketball practice. His fingers drummed restlessly on his backpack as he replayed the conversation with Mrs. Langston over and over in his head. Each time, her words stung a little more. After a few minutes, he spotted Caleb jogging over, his hair damp with sweat, and a grin on his face. "What's up, Malik?" Caleb panted, giving him a quick fist bump. "You look like you lost a fight or something." Malik forced a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Kind of feels like it. Mrs. Langston gave me another low grade on my report. I don't get it, Caleb. I worked hard on it. I thought it was good." Caleb frowned, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "Another low grade? Man, she's got it out for you or something." Malik sighed, kicking a small rock near his foot. "That's what it feels like. And then, when I asked why it was a C, she acted like I didn't even try. Told me I should stay after school for extra help." "Extra help?" Caleb scoffed. "For what? You're doing fine. You know more about history than half the people in that class." Malik shook his head. "It doesn't matter. She just doesn't think I'm good enough, and she never says stuff like that to anyone else. Liam barely reads the textbook, and he got an A." Caleb fell silent for a moment, watching Malik with a thoughtful look. "You should tell your mom. She'd go to bat for you. She'd definitely give Mrs. Langston a piece of her mind." Malik hesitated. "Maybe, but I don't know. I don't want her to worry. She's got enough on her plate, with work and all." Caleb nudged him lightly. "Still, man, if Mrs. Langston's messing with your grades, it's not gonna stop until someone does something. You know she's not gonna admit she's wrong." "Yeah, I know," Malik muttered, feeling a pang of frustration. It was like he was trapped in some silent struggle that no one else saw or understood. "It's just, I shouldn't have to fight to prove I'm trying. Isn't that supposed to be obvious?" Caleb nodded, his expression serious. "Yeah, but some people don't want to see it. You know what I mean?" Malik nodded back, his gaze distant. He did know, but he wasn't sure how to explain it. He couldn't put into words the feeling that Mrs. Langston looked at him differently than she did everyone else. It was in the way her tone sharpened when she talked to him, the way her eyes skimmed past him like he wasn't worth her attention. And worst of all, he couldn't shake the fear that no one else would see it, either. As they walked home, Caleb changed the subject to something lighter, chatting about a video game they both played. Malik tried to keep up, but his mind kept drifting back to Mrs. Langston's sharp voice, her dismissive stare. Her words circled in his head like a bad song he couldn't shake. "Just because you tried doesn't mean it was good enough." Later that evening, Malik sat at the kitchen table, pretending to work on his homework. His mom, Latoya, was busy in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove. Every now and then she glanced over at him, her eyes full of the gentle warmth that always made him feel safe. But tonight, he didn't feel safe. He felt small and a little embarrassed, like he was carrying a secret that would somehow disappoint her if she found out. "Malik," her voice broke his thoughts, and he looked up. "You've been real quiet tonight. Something on your mind?" He hesitated, tapping his pencil against the notebook. "It's nothing. Just tired, I guess." She tilted her head, studying him in that way only mothers could. "You sure? You've been working hard in school. I know when you're tired, and this ain't just that." Malik opened his mouth to answer, but the words stuck. Part of him wanted to tell her everything, to let her know how unfair it felt, how Mrs. Langston's words had made him feel like he wasn't good enough. But the other part worried that bringing it up would make things worse. What if Mrs. Langston found out? What if it only gave her more reasons to pick on him? Instead, he shrugged. "I'm just tired, Mom. I'm okay." She didn't look convinced, but she let it go, stirring the pot one last time before turning down the heat. "All right, but you know you can tell me anything, right?" Malik nodded, managing a small smile. "I know. Thanks, Mom." She came over, kissed the top of his head, and gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Get some rest after dinner, okay? You're doing great." Her words made him feel a little better, but as he sat back down to work on his homework, the feeling of being singled out, of being looked at through a lens he didn't fully understand, remained. The following week, Malik walked into Mrs. Langston's class with a renewed determination. He'd spent every evening working hard on his latest assignment, a research report on an influential civil rights leader. His mom had noticed him staying up late, but he'd brushed it off, wanting this report to be as close to perfect as he could get it. Maybe if he put in even more effort, Mrs. Langston would finally see his hard work. The bell rang, and Mrs. Langston strode into the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She held a stack of graded papers, thumbing through them as she moved to the front of the room. "Everyone, I've graded your reports on civil rights leaders," she announced, her tone cool and detached. "Some of you managed to demonstrate genuine effort, while others, well, I can't say the same." Malik's heart pounded as she called his name. He rose from his seat, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on him as he made his way to the front. She handed him his paper without looking at him, her mouth set in a thin line. He took a deep breath, glancing down at the grade she'd scribbled at the top, a D+. The blood rushed to his ears, and he stared at the paper in disbelief. D+? He'd poured everything into this report, stayed up late researching, double-checking facts, rewriting parts he thought might not be clear enough. How could she possibly think this was a D+ effort? "Is there a problem, Malik?" Mrs. Langston's voice was sharp, cutting through his thoughts. He looked up at her, forcing himself to speak, even though his throat felt tight. I don't understand. I worked really hard on this. I followed all the guidelines. Why did I get a D+? Mrs. Langston raised an eyebrow, a faint, cold smile playing on her lips. "Sometimes, Malik, hard work doesn't always translate to quality work. It's about understanding the material, not just putting in time. Just because you tried doesn't mean it was good enough." Her words struck him like a punch to the gut. He could feel his hands shaking slightly, but he didn't look away. "But I did understand it," he said, his voice a little louder than he'd intended. "I wrote about all the points you mentioned in class. I even went beyond that. I don't see how this could be a D+. Mrs. Langston's face hardened, and the room fell silent as the other students turned to watch. "I don't appreciate your tone, Malik. You're welcome to see me after school if you need help understanding why your work doesn't meet the standard. This is not the time or place for arguments." "I'm not arguing," Malik replied, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm just asking you to explain why." "Enough." Her voice cut him off, cold and final. She looked down at him, a dismissive glare in her eyes. "You clearly don't have the background to meet my standards, Malik. Not everyone has the right foundation for success in this subject. I suggest you focus on improving, rather than questioning my judgment." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Malik's cheeks burned as the meaning behind her words sank in. She didn't believe he was capable. She didn't think he had the right background to understand her lessons, to earn a fair grade, to be anything other than what she'd already decided he was. A quiet, bitter anger bubbled up inside him, stronger than he'd ever felt before. "That's not fair," he said, barely able to keep his voice steady. "I deserve to be treated the same as everyone else." Mrs. Langston's lips curled slightly, an almost imperceptible smirk. "Fairness, Malik, is making sure everyone gets what they've earned. And you, unfortunately, have not earned more than that grade. I suggest you take this as an opportunity to learn some humility." The humiliation was unbearable. He felt trapped, standing there in front of everyone, exposed and powerless. He wanted to shout, to make her see how unfair she was being, but he knew that would only make things worse. He bit back his words, swallowing the frustration that had been building for weeks. Malik turned and walked back to his seat, clutching his paper tightly. As he sat down, he heard a few whispered comments from his classmates, but he forced himself to block them out. He couldn't let her win, couldn't let her take away the one thing he'd worked so hard for, his belief in himself. The rest of the class went by in a blur. He hardly heard Mrs. Langston's lecture, her voice a dull hum in the background as he stared at his paper, the red D+ scrawled across it like a slap in the face. When the bell finally rang, he grabbed his things and hurried out of the classroom, desperate to escape the oppressive weight of her judgment. After school, Malik lingered by the bike racks, still reeling from what had happened. Caleb found him there, frowning as he took in Malik's slumped shoulders and clenched fists. "What happened, man?" Caleb asked, concern in his eyes. Malik didn't answer at first, just handed Caleb the report. Caleb's eyes scanned the paper, his frown deepening. "D+? Are you kidding me? I saw you working on this thing every day. There's no way this is a D+. Malik let out a shaky breath, struggling to keep his voice steady. She doesn't think I'm good enough. She said I don't have the right background for her standards. She made it sound like it didn't even matter how hard I worked. Caleb's face twisted with anger. That's messed up. She's supposed to be a teacher. Isn't she supposed to be helping you, not tearing you down? Malik shrugged, his shoulders slumping. It doesn't matter. She's never going to treat me the same as everyone else. She's already decided I'm not worth it. Caleb put a hand on Malik's shoulder, his voice firm. You're not letting this go, right? You can't just let her treat you like that. Malik's jaw tightened. I don't know what else to do. She's the teacher. No one's going to believe me. Caleb paused, then leaned in closer, his voice low but determined. Tell your mom. I mean it this time, Malik. She's got to know. If Mrs. Langston thinks she can get away with this, she's wrong. Malik looked away, wrestling with the decision. Part of him wanted to keep it to himself, to avoid dragging his mom into it, but the other part, bitter and angry, knew Caleb was right. Mrs. Langston's words had crossed a line, and he couldn't ignore it anymore. Finally, he nodded, a sense of quiet determination settling over him. Yeah, I'll tell her. As he walked home, Malik felt a small spark of hope flicker inside him. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. That evening, Malik sat at the kitchen table, his fingers tracing over the bold D+ marked at the top of his history report. Mrs. Langston's words echoed in his mind, each one making the grade sting even more. Across the room, his mother, Latoya, glanced over at him as she prepared dinner, noticing his slumped shoulders and the way he seemed miles away. Malik, honey, she said gently, setting down her spoon and moving to sit beside him. Something's been on your mind for a while now. What's going on? Malik hesitated, glancing down at his paper before taking a deep breath. It's my history teacher, Mrs. Langston. Latoya's brows drew together. Mrs. Langston? What happened? He looked up, the hurt evident in his eyes. She keeps giving me these low grades, no matter how hard I try. I put hours into my last report, and she gave me a D+. When I asked her why, she said I didn't have the right background to meet her standards. She said that some people just don't have the foundation to do well in her class. A flicker of anger flashed in Latoya's eyes, and her voice dropped to a calm but steely tone. She said that to you? About your background? Malik nodded. It's not just the grades, Mom. She talks down to me in front of everyone, like she's looking for ways to make me feel like I'm not trying or like I don't belong there. Latoya's jaw tightened. You've done nothing wrong, Malik. It sounds like she's the one who's forgotten what it means to be a teacher. I'll handle this. She won't get away with making you feel like you're not good enough. The next morning, Latoya walked through the school's polished corridors, her heels clicking with purpose. As she approached Mrs. Langston's classroom, she was directed to the door, where Mrs. Langston was waiting, her expression polite but tense. Mrs. Andrews, Mrs. Langston greeted her, a slight smile on her lips. I understand you had some concerns. Yes, I do, Latoya replied, stepping into the classroom. She took in the sight of the neat rows of desks, picturing her son at the back, listening as his teacher subtly tore down his hard work. I wanted to speak with you directly about the way you've been treating my son, Malik. Mrs. Langston's polite expression faltered for just a moment before she recovered. I assure you, Mrs. Andrews, I treat all of my students equally. My standards are high, and I expect all students to meet them. Latoya met her gaze, her voice unwavering. My son has been working hard on every assignment. I've seen him put in the hours, researching, writing, and making sure his work is up to par. But no matter what he does, he's met with low grades and comments about his background. So, I'm curious, Mrs. Langston, what exactly do you mean by that? Mrs. Langston's eyes narrowed slightly, her tone turning colder. Mrs. Andrews, as a teacher, I'm simply doing my job. I can't lower my expectations just because some students come from, shall we say, less academic backgrounds. Some students simply lack the cultural foundation necessary for higher-level comprehension. Latoya's eyes flashed, and she crossed her arms. Cultural foundation? Mrs. Langston, my son is every bit as capable as any other student in this classroom. If his grades don't reflect that, it's not because he lacks foundation. It's because you refuse to see his abilities. Mrs. Langston's expression hardened, and a hint of impatience crept into her voice. Mrs. Andrews, let's be realistic. Certain students who come from certain backgrounds, may struggle more with complex material. I'm sure Malik has strengths in other areas, but history and analysis may not be suited to everyone. This is an advanced curriculum. Latoya's jaw clenched, but she kept her tone steady. Mrs. Langston, you're making assumptions about my son based on nothing but your own biases. You're assuming he can't succeed because he doesn't fit the image you have of a model student. Mrs. Langston's lips pursed into a thin line. I'm simply giving Malik realistic feedback, Mrs. Andrews. Not every student is destined for academic excellence, and it's better to recognize that early. I don't want to set him up for failure by pretending he's capable of something he's not. Latoya's voice turned cold, her words sharp. Failure? Mrs. Langston, Malik is capable. He's been capable all along, but you've decided he's not, based on nothing but his skin color and your prejudices. You're not helping him by tearing him down. You're holding him back. Mrs. Langston gave a tight smile, her tone dripping with condescension. Mrs. Andrews, if you feel my methods are too harsh, perhaps Malik would do better in a different class, one where he might feel more comfortable. This class may simply be too challenging. Latoya's voice was dangerously calm, her words clipped. Challenging or exclusive? You're suggesting my son doesn't belong here, not because of his skills, but because he doesn't meet your idea of a proper student. That's not teaching, Mrs. Langston. That's discrimination. Mrs. Langston's face paled, but she held her ground. I'm sorry you feel that way, Mrs. Andrews, but I am not changing my standards for anyone. I'm here to uphold academic integrity, not cater to parents who can't accept the limitations of their children. Latoya took a slow, steadying breath, her voice barely above a whisper. If academic integrity means judging a child by their race, then you're not just a poor teacher, you're an obstacle. I've already spoken to Principal Jansen, and I'll be requesting a full review of Malik's work by another teacher. If his grades and treatment reflect anything other than fairness, you will be held accountable. For the first time, Mrs. Langston's confident demeanor faltered. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice came out strained. You're welcome to speak with the principal, but I doubt you'll find anything amiss. Latoya held her gaze, her voice low but fierce. We'll see. And if this is what you call teaching, then it's only a matter of time before others see through you as well. With that, Latoya turned and left the classroom, her steps steady and unyielding. She would not allow Mrs. Langston or anyone else to tear down her son's confidence or his future. Malik was anxious as he walked into school the next day. He knew his mom had spoken with Mrs. Langston, and he wasn't sure what to expect. Part of him worried that the teacher's attitude might worsen, that she'd try to find other ways to make him feel small, but he also felt a surge of strength knowing his mom was on his side, standing up for him. Whatever happened, he didn't feel so alone anymore. At lunchtime, he met up with Caleb in the cafeteria. Caleb had already heard from other students that something big had gone down between Mrs. Langston and Malik's mom. He leaned across the table, eyes wide with curiosity and excitement. Yo, Malik, Caleb whispered. I heard your mom told off Mrs. Langston yesterday. What happened? Malik shrugged, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. She talked to her. Yeah, she called her out for the way she's been treating me. Caleb grinned. Finally. I bet she didn't see that coming. So, what happens now? Malik lowered his voice. My mom asked Principal Jansen to have another teacher look at my work. She thinks Mrs. Langston's grading is unfair, and the principal said he'd make it happen. Caleb's grin faded slightly, a cautious look in his eyes. You think he'll actually do it? Malik shrugged, feeling a twinge of uncertainty. I don't know, but if they don't, my mom isn't going to let this go. She's serious. Later that day, Principal Jansen called Malik down to his office. Malik's heart pounded as he walked through the halls, trying to keep his thoughts calm. When he reached the office, the principal was waiting for him. a folder of his assignments open on the desk. Another teacher, Mrs. Conway, sat beside him, reviewing the contents with a serious expression. "Malik, thank you for coming," Principal Jansen began, his tone neutral. "Your mother brought some concerns to my attention, and we're going to take a closer look at your recent assignments. Mrs. Conway, our assistant head of history, will be conducting an independent review." Malik nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension as he took a seat. Mrs. Conway looked at him kindly. "I've heard about your work ethic, Malik, and I want to assure you that we're here to be fair. I'll be reviewing these assignments with fresh eyes, so let's take our time and make sure everything's accurate." She flipped through his assignments, pausing occasionally to make notes. Malik watched as she scanned each page, her expression thoughtful. With each passing minute, the tension in the room seemed to build, the silence heavy as she examined every detail. After a while, she looked up, a frown creasing her brow. "Malik," she said gently, "from what I'm seeing here, your work shows a strong understanding of the material. Your reports are thorough, well-organized, and insightful." She turned to Principal Jansen, her tone growing sharper. "There's no justifiable reason these assignments should be graded this low. Malik's work deserves higher marks." Principal Jansen's face shifted, a trace of discomfort showing as he cleared his throat. "Are you saying there's been an error in the grading, Mrs. Conway?" Mrs. Conway nodded, her expression firm. "Yes, I am. In fact, the discrepancies are significant. Malik's assignments were graded far lower than his peers for comparable work. This suggests a pattern that's troubling, to say the least." Principal Jansen shifted in his seat, looking visibly uncomfortable. "We'll need to follow up on this, of course. Thank you for your honesty, Mrs. Conway." Turning to Malik, the principal's voice softened. "Malik, we'll be adjusting your grades accordingly. You have our assurance that any bias or unfair treatment in this matter will be addressed seriously." Malik felt a surge of relief wash over him. It was the first time he'd heard someone at school acknowledge the unfairness, and it made him feel validated in a way he hadn't expected. "Thank you," he said quietly, looking between them. I just wanted to be treated the same as everyone else." Mrs. Conway nodded, offering him a warm smile. "And that's exactly what you deserve, Malik. We'll make sure of it." That evening, Malik told his mom everything that had happened in the principal's office. Latoya listened intently, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and resolve. "So they're adjusting your grades?" she asked, a proud glint in her eye. Malik nodded. "Yeah, Mrs. Conway said my work was good, and that it deserved higher marks. And Principal Jansen agreed to change them." Latoya's smile widened, and she reached out to hug him. "I'm so proud of you, Malik. You stood up for yourself, and you didn't let anyone make you feel less than you are." Malik hugged her back, feeling a sense of pride he hadn't felt in a long time. "Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you." Latoya held him close for a moment, then pulled back, her gaze serious. "But this isn't over. If Mrs. Langston has been treating you this way, it's possible she's done it to others too. The school needs to know what's happening in her classroom." Malik nodded, understanding her point. Mrs. Langston's behavior hadn't just been about grades, it had been about making him feel out of place, unworthy of success, and now he was ready to make sure she faced the consequences. As he lay in bed that night, Malik felt lighter than he had in weeks. He knew there was still more to confront, but he also knew he didn't have to do it alone. And for the first time, he felt hopeful that things might really change. The next morning, Malik walked into school with a sense of renewed confidence. It felt strange, almost surreal, to think that things might finally be changing. For the first time in weeks, he didn't dread going to history class, knowing that someone had finally listened to him. When he arrived at Mrs. Langston's classroom, he noticed an unusual tension in the air. The students were whispering in low voices, casting glances toward the teacher's desk where Mrs. Langston sat, her face set in a rigid mask of forced calm. As Malik took his seat, he felt her gaze flicker briefly toward him, but she quickly looked away, focusing on her lesson plan. She seemed distracted, her movements stiffer than usual. He could almost sense the irritation simmering beneath her composed exterior, and he knew the reason. Mrs. Conway's review had revealed the truth. Midway through the lesson, there was a knock on the door, and Principal Jansen stepped in, followed closely by Mrs. Conway. The entire class turned to watch as they entered, their eyes widening with curiosity. Mrs. Langston's face tightened, her jaw clenching slightly. "Mrs. Langston," Principal Jansen said, his voice firm but polite, "could we have a word with you in the hallway, please?" For a moment, Mrs. Langston hesitated, her expression faltering. She glanced around the classroom, clearly aware of the audience, before giving a tight nod. She set down her chalk and followed them out, closing the door behind her. The room buzzed with murmurs the moment the door shut. Malik exchanged a glance with Caleb, who raised his eyebrows in surprise, giving Malik a quick thumbs up. Outside in the hallway, LaToya had joined Principal Jansen and Mrs. Conway, and the four of them stood in a tight circle. Mrs. Langston's expression was tense, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at LaToya with barely concealed disdain. "Mrs. Langston," Principal Jansen began, his voice calm but firm, "we've completed a review of Malik Andrews's recent assignments. Mrs. Conway found consistent discrepancies between the quality of his work and the grades he received. These inconsistencies, combined with your repeated remarks about his background, raise serious concerns." Mrs. Langston's face grew pale, but she lifted her chin, her voice cold. "Are you suggesting that I haven't been fair in my grading? Because I assure you, I hold all students to the same standards." LaToya's eyes flashed, her tone measured but pointed. "The issue isn't about standards, Mrs. Langston. It's about bias. Malik is a hard-working, intelligent student, and you've been treating him as though he's less capable simply because he doesn't fit your assumptions." Mrs. Langston's lips pressed into a thin line. "With all due respect, Mrs. Andrews, some students simply lack the cultural context necessary to excel in an academic setting. It's not my fault that your son struggles with material that requires a certain level of background knowledge." LaToya's voice grew colder. "Cultural context. Are you implying that Malik's race or upbringing makes him less suited for your classroom? Because that's not only insulting, it's blatantly racist." Mrs. Langston's composure cracked for a moment, a flicker of indignation crossing her face. "Mrs. Andrews, I don't appreciate being accused of something so vile. I have always maintained high expectations for all my students, regardless of background." Mrs. Conway stepped forward, her voice stern. "Mrs. Langston, the evidence suggests otherwise. Malik's assignments were graded significantly lower than similar work from other students. Additionally, the comments you've made about his background and his lack of foundation are not only inappropriate, but suggest a clear pattern of discrimination." Mrs. Langston's voice grew defensive, her tone laced with bitterness. "You're all reading too much into this. Perhaps Mrs. Andrews is just too sensitive about her son's performance. I'm here to provide an honest education, not to coddle." Principal Jansen's expression hardened, his tone firm. "Regardless of your intentions, Mrs. Langston, your actions have created an unwelcoming environment for Malik, and we cannot allow that to continue. As of today, you are being placed on suspension pending a full investigation." Mrs. Langston's eyes widened, a flash of disbelief in her gaze. "Suspension? You're really going to punish me because of one parent's complaints?" "It's not just one complaint, Mrs. Langston," LaToya said firmly. "It's a pattern of behavior, one that you've tried to hide behind your so-called standards." Mrs. Langston's face twisted with anger, but she forced a tight smile. "Fine, do what you must. But don't expect me to change my standards just because some people can't handle them." With that, she turned and walked briskly down the hallway, her heels clicking loudly against the floor as she left the building. When LaToya returned home that evening, she found Malik waiting for her, his expression a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. "What happened?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. LaToya sat beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Mrs. Langston has been suspended, Malik. The school found that she was treating you unfairly, and they're investigating further." Malik's eyes widened in surprise, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "She's really gone?" "For now, Yes, Latoya said, her voice gentle. But what's important is that you were heard. You stood up for yourself, and you made them see the truth. Malik took a deep breath, the weight of relief settling over him. He had spent so many days doubting himself, wondering if he was truly at fault. But now he knew the truth. The problem had never been him. "Thanks, Mom," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." Latoya smiled, hugging him close. "You did this, Malik, and don't let anyone ever make you feel like you're less than you are. You're strong, capable, and you deserve every opportunity." As Malik sat back, a sense of peace settled over him. For the first time, he felt like he could truly be himself, without fear of judgment or prejudice. And that, more than anything, was a victory he would carry with him. The following week, Mrs. Langston returned to the school for a formal review. Her suspension had rattled her, but she'd convinced herself that the investigation would vindicate her, that the school would realize she'd simply been upholding standards and doing her duty as an educator. She walked through the hallways with her chin held high, ignoring the whispers from students and teachers alike. As she approached the principal's office, she saw Malik walking down the opposite hall, heading to class. He glanced up and met her eyes briefly before quickly looking away. She felt a surge of resentment boil up inside her. Here was the student who'd dared to challenge her, the one who'd stirred up trouble and painted her as something she wasn't. Unable to contain herself, she called out, her voice echoing in the corridor, sharp and accusatory. "You!" she snapped, her tone dripping with disdain. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Malik froze, turning slowly to face her, his expression a mix of surprise and unease. He glanced around, seeing that other students and teachers had stopped to watch the exchange, their eyes wide with curiosity. Mrs. Langston continued, her voice rising, her face flushed with anger. "All this nonsense, this complaint about unfair treatment. You think you're special? You think you deserve a free pass just because you whined about your grades?" Malik stayed silent, his eyes wary as he watched her unravel. He didn't need to say anything. Mrs. Langston was doing enough damage on her own. "You don't belong in my class," she continued, her voice breaking as her anger spilled out. "You're not up to the standard, and everyone knows it. I was trying to help you. But no, you'd rather play the victim." A few teachers had stepped out of their classrooms by now, whispering to each other, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. Principal Jansen hurried over, his face pale with alarm as he approached Mrs. Langston. "Mrs. Langston, that's enough," he said firmly, placing himself between her and Malik. But she ignored him, her voice growing louder. "People like him," she spat, gesturing toward Malik, "are always looking for a shortcut, always looking to cry discrimination to get what they want. It's disgraceful." The principal's face turned a shade of red, his tone sharp and commanding. "Mrs. Langston, this behavior is unacceptable. You are to leave this building immediately." She looked around, her expression defiant. "I have a right to defend myself. I've done nothing wrong except try to bring some standards to this school." "Enough," Principal Jansen said, his voice hard. "Mrs. Langston, your conduct today is grounds for immediate termination. Your employment with this school is over." Mrs. Langston's eyes widened in shock as the words sank in, her defiance crumbling. For a brief moment, she looked around, realizing the full extent of her actions. Teachers and students stared at her, their expressions filled with disgust and disbelief. She turned her gaze back to Malik, her eyes narrowing one last time. "This is your fault," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You've ruined everything." Without another word, she turned and stormed out of the building, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. The silence that followed felt heavy, charged with the weight of what had just happened. Principal Jansen turned to Malik, his expression softening. "Are you all right, Malik?" Malik nodded, though he felt a swirl of emotions, relief, disbelief, and even a bit of sadness that someone could harbor so much hatred. "I'm sorry you had to experience that," Principal Jansen said, his voice gentle but firm. "But know this, her actions reflect only her own failings, not yours. You're a bright, capable student, and this school is here to support you." Malik gave a small, grateful nod, his voice quiet. "Thank you, Principal Jansen." As he walked away, he felt a new lightness in his step. The teacher who'd tried to make him feel small, to break his spirit, was gone. For the first time in a long time, Malik felt like he could truly be himself, without fear of judgment or prejudice, and that was a victory he'd carry with him. Forced to switch schools because of her family's situation, a 16-year-old black girl struggles to adjust to her new math class. Lost in her love for numbers and equations, she's suddenly pulled back to reality when her teacher calls her name. He sends her to the board, giving her a problem far too advanced for someone her age. Some students watch, amused. Others don't care, waiting for her to fail. But what they don't know is this girl isn't just any student. She's a hidden math genius. The halls of Lincoln High smelled like old books and cleaning supplies, nothing like the shiny halls of her last school. Zara Williams walked in quietly, feeling the weight of silent judgment. She hadn't wanted to leave her old school, the one place she'd learned to survive. But when her mom got a new job at a hospital across town, she had no choice. Lincoln High was closer, more diverse, as her mom said, as if that made things easier. It didn't. From her first class, she felt it. The stares from students who already had their friend groups, the teachers who barely glanced at her when taking attendance, the seats already taken before she could choose one. At lunch, she sat alone. No one invited her. No one even seemed to notice her. She was used to being ignored. But here, it wasn't just about being unseen. It was about being an outsider. After school. When the final bell rang, students rushed out laughing, shoving books into bags, making plans. But for Zara, the day wasn't over. She slipped through the crowd, keeping her head down. Blending in was a skill she'd mastered. If teachers didn't notice her, they didn't expect much. If students didn't notice her, they didn't ask questions she couldn't answer. Outside, the air smelled of cut grass and bus exhaust. Most kids got to go home, relax, complain about school. Zara didn't have that luxury. Her job at Gus's Diner started in 20 minutes. The walk there was familiar, past cracked sidewalks and dimly lit stores. The buildings looked worn, forgotten, just like the people who lived here. She tied on her apron as soon as she walked in. The clatter of dishes and low chatter greeted her. Mrs. Patel, the owner, barely looked up. "You're late. By 2 minutes." Zara mumbled an apology. "Still late," Mrs. Patel said, but without real anger. The shift passed in a blur, clearing tables, refilling drinks, serving tired customers. Zara worked without stopping, her body moving on autopilot while her mind replayed math problems from class. When the dinner rush ended, she finally got a break. She slipped into the back closet, pulled out an old notebook, and started writing. This was how she kept up. No tutors, no fancy courses, just stolen moments like this, scribbling notes under a flickering light. The library. After her shift, the streets were dark and quiet. But Zara wasn't going home yet. She walked to Lincoln High's library, her second home. Here, no one expected her to talk. Here, she could disappear into books filled with numbers, things that made more sense than people ever did. She pulled out an advanced math book, flipping through pages, solving equations in her head. Then, a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Seriously?" Zara tensed before looking up. Monica Wells stood there, tall, confident, dressed like she never worried about hand-me-downs or used books. Two friends hovered beside her, smirking. "Didn't know you were into this stuff," Monica said, leaning against the shelf. "Pretty sure the easy math books are over there." One of her friends laughed. Zara kept her voice steady. I'm in the right section. Monica rolled her eyes. What? You think you're some math genius now just because Mr. Calloway made you solve a problem? The words stung. Zara had spent years being ignored. Now, this sudden attention, even if cruel, felt strange. It's kind of funny, Monica continued. The girl who works at Gus's, acting smart. Her friends laughed louder. Zara took a slow breath, gripping the book. She'd spent years pretending words like this didn't hurt. But now she wasn't just studying for herself. She was studying for the future people like Monica thought she'd never have. She closed the book and met Monica's gaze. Funny, Zara said calmly. We'll see who's laughing when I leave this town. And you're still here. Monica's smirk faded. Zara didn't wait for a reply. She walked past them, feeling their stares as she checked out the book. She had work to do. Late night. By the time she got home, the anger had settled into something colder, stronger. She didn't turn on the lights. The street lamp outside was enough. She dropped her bag, flipped open her notebook. The equations were still sharp in her mind. If they thought she'd quit, if they thought she'd let them push her down and stay down, they didn't know her at all. She worked late into the night, the numbers unfolding under her pencil. The only language that had ever made sense to her was math. When Zara walked into school the next morning, exhaustion weighed her down. She had no idea that today would change everything. Dr. Nathan Ellis sat at the back of the classroom, arms crossed, eyes sharp behind thin glasses. He had spent the morning moving between rooms, watching, listening. Lincoln High was like every other struggling school he had visited. A place where talent often went unnoticed, where bright kids barely had the support they needed. His job wasn't just to find gifted students, it was to find the ones nobody else saw. Mr. Calloway stood at the front of the class, droning on in the tired voice of a teacher who had already decided which students mattered and which didn't. Ellis had seen enough classrooms to know who got called on and who got ignored. His gaze drifted over the students, stopping on a girl near the back. Her head was down, pencil tapping her notebook, dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept. Then she lifted her head slightly, and he saw it. The way her eyes flicked to the board before anyone else's. She wasn't just listening. She was already ahead. Interesting. Mr. Calloway's voice cut through the room. Zara. The girl stiffened. Ellis watched as Calloway turned, smirking slightly as he pointed at the board. Since you seem distracted, why don't you come up and solve this for us? The equation on the board wasn't just a challenge, it was a trap. And from the smug look on Calloway's face, he wanted Zara to fail. Ellis leaned back, arms still crossed. Let's see what she does. Zara clenched her fists, but stood, walking to the front with slow, steady steps. The room was silent, thick with expectation, doubt, and quiet laughter. She didn't need to look to know what her classmates were thinking. She's going to mess up. Why even try? But she wasn't thinking about them. She was staring at the equation, complex, with layers of fractions and variables, the kind of problem meant to make students doubt themselves. She picked up the chalk. Behind her, Calloway crossed his arms, smirking. Go ahead, take your time, he said, voice dripping with mock patience. If it's too hard, you can always sit back down. The words lit a fire in her. Zara exhaled, tuning out the whispers, the laughter, the weight of Calloway's amusement. She had solved harder problems than this, in diner closets, on scrap paper, in stolen moments nobody cared about. Her first stroke of chalk was firm. She broke the problem apart, step by step, rearranging terms, isolating variables. The class waited for her to hesitate, to stumble, to prove she didn't belong up there. But she didn't. The snickers faded first. Then the whispers. Then Calloway's smirk twitched. Zara felt the shift. The moment amusement turned into something else. When she finished, the room was silent. She set the chalk down and turned, locking eyes with Calloway. "That should be right," she said, voice steady. Calloway blinked, mouth opening slightly before snapping shut. He scanned her work, searching for a mistake. Anything to prove her wrong. But there was nothing. A murmur spread through the class. A boy in the front row, Jason, frowned at the board. "Wait," he said. "That's actually correct." Calloway's face tightened. "Well," he muttered, grabbing the eraser. "Lucky guess." Zara's jaw clenched. "There's no luck in math, sir. It's either right or it's not." She nodded at the board. "And that is right." A few students gasped. Others stifled laughs. Calloway froze for a second before scrubbing the board harder than necessary. But before he could dismiss her, a new voice cut through the room. That wasn't just right. That was impressive. The class turned. Dr. Ellis stepped forward, sharp eyes fixed on Zara. The air shifted again, but this time the pressure wasn't on her. It was on Calloway. The teacher's face paled. His mouth opened, then closed. Ellis stepped closer. "Honestly, I'm more interested in what I just saw than whatever lesson you had planned." His eyes flicked to Calloway for just a second, long enough to make his point. Zara stayed quiet, but her fingers tightened on the edge of her sweater. Calloway's mouth twitched, trying to take back control. "Well, you see, Zara's never really—" Ellis cut him off, tilting his head slightly. "Because you never asked her." The words hung in the air. Calloway's confidence wavered. Ellis turned back to Zara. "How would you like to take a real test?" His voice was calm, steady. "One that could change your life." Zara's breath caught. The class went silent. Calloway looked like he'd eaten something sour. Zara forced herself to speak, her voice unsteady for the first time since stepping up to the board. "Oh, test?" Ellis nodded. "I recruit for the National Math Scholars Program. We find brilliant students who haven't been given a real chance." He pointed at the erased equation. "That wasn't a high school problem. It was university level. And you solved it in minutes." Zara's chest tightened. For years, she'd been ignored. For years, she'd fought just to learn. Now, this stranger was offering her something impossible. Calloway wasn't done. "With all due respect, Dr. Ellis," he said through clenched teeth, "she's not ready for this." Ellis didn't blink. "She's exactly who we're looking for. Whether you saw her talent or not, doesn't matter." Zara wasn't sure if what she felt was excitement, fear, or something else entirely. Ellis pulled out a sleek business card, thick, expensive, the kind that didn't belong in her hands, and placed it on her desk. "This is my contact. Take a placement exam next week. If you pass, you could earn a scholarship to one of the best schools in the country." The class erupted. A scholarship. A future. A door she'd never imagined was suddenly wide open. Zara's fingers hovered over the card before picking it up. It felt unreal. Calloway cleared his throat. "Zara, I'm sure you'll need time to think." "No." The word came out before she could stop herself. Ellis raised an eyebrow. "I'll do it," she said, gripping the card tighter. Ellis almost smiled, as if he liked that she didn't hesitate. Calloway looked like he wanted to vanish. The bell rang, but no one moved. For the first time in her life, Zara wasn't invisible. She was undeniable. Zara gripped the card tightly. "I know," she said, her voice firm. Calloway pressed his lips together. He looked like he wanted to argue, to remind her one last time that girls like her didn't belong in places like that. But Dr. Ellis stepped in, cutting him off effortlessly. "She knows," Ellis repeated, his tone leaving no room for debate. He turned to Zara, ignoring Calloway completely. "I'll send you the details. 1 week. Be ready." Zara nodded and tucked the card into her pocket, half afraid it would vanish if she stared at it too long. She left without another word. By the time she got home, reality sank in. She set the card on the kitchen table and stared at it, heart racing. National Math Scholars Program. She'd read about it once in an old library magazine. They didn't just offer chances, they built futures. MIT, Stanford, Princeton. Names that had always felt out of reach. Now, that chance was in her hands. But excitement faded fast, replaced by something heavier. She had 1 week. 1 week to prove she belonged. 1 week to prepare for the hardest test of her life. She pulled out her notebook and got to work. The days blurred into exhaustion, numbers, and relentless focus. Mornings were for school, where equations now felt too easy compared to what was coming. Evenings were for Gus's diner, where she scribbled notes on receipts and napkins between orders. Nights were for studying, flipping through library books, pushing herself through concepts far beyond her classes. Her mother noticed. "Zara, you're not sleeping," she said one night, standing in the doorway, arms crossed. She wasn't angry, just worried. "You're pushing too hard." Zara forced a smile, fingers tightening around her pencil. "Just one more problem, Mama." Her mother sighed but didn't argue. She understood. She left a plate of apples on the table. A quiet way of saying, "I believe in you." No one had ever given Zara a shot before. She wouldn't waste it. 3 months later, the test day arrived too quickly. Zara stood outside Lincoln High's auditorium, clutching her worn backpack, pulse pounding. Word had spread. The room was packed. Students, teachers, even the principal. Some were curious. Some doubted. Some just wanted to see her fail. At the front, a whiteboard waited with an impossibly complex equation. Calloway stood to the side, arms crossed, face neutral, but his eyes were smug. "This problem has stumped mathematicians for years," he announced. "Even graduate students struggle. But Zara believes she can solve it." His lips twitched. "Let's see if she can." The room fell silent. Zara stepped forward, gripping the marker. She steadied her breathing, steadied herself. Numbers weren't just numbers. They were pieces of a puzzle. And she'd spent her whole life solving puzzles. She started writing. The crowd watched in silence. The first stroke of the marker was sure, deliberate. Zara tuned out the whispers, the doubtful stares, Calloway's looming presence. None of it mattered. Only the numbers did. She broke the problem apart, isolating variables, rearranging terms, each step sharp with focus. She wasn't just solving it, she was seeing it. The patterns unfolded. The logic clicked into place, like a lock turning with the right key. The whispers in the crowd slowly died. Students leaned forward, their doubt turning into something else. Jason, the boy from the front row, squinted at the board, then at his notes, trying to follow along. A girl near the back nudged her friend, eyes wide as she understood what was happening. Even the principal, who had been watching with mild interest, sat up straighter. By the time Zara reached the halfway point, the room was completely silent. Mr. Calloway's smirk faltered. His confidence wavered as he realized what was unfolding. He stepped closer, arms still crossed, eyes darting between Zara and the board, searching for a mistake, any reason to stop this before she proved him wrong. But Zara didn't hesitate. She kept working, moving through the problem like she had done it 100 times before. In a way, she had. Maybe not this exact equation, but the challenge, being doubted, being told she wasn't good enough, being made to feel like she didn't belong. That was familiar. She finished with one final stroke, underlining her answer. Then she turned. For a moment, no one moved. Dr. Ellis stepped forward, scanning the board with the sharp eye of someone who had spent his life doing this. His lips parted slightly, not in surprise, but in admiration. "Absolutely correct," he said. His voice was calm, but it cut through the room like thunder. A wave of noise rushed through the crowd. Someone gasped. Someone whispered, "No way." Jason jumped up from his seat. That was insane. Zara barely heard them. She was watching Calloway. His mouth opened, then closed. He had nothing left to say. No sharp remark, no excuse. His grip on his clipboard tightened, knuckles turning white. Zara tilted her head slightly. "Lucky guess," she said quietly. The words hit hard. Calloway inhaled sharply, but before he could speak, Dr. Ellis turned to him. "I believe you mentioned that even graduate students struggle with this problem?" Ellis's voice was polite, but the edge underneath was clear. Calloway's jaw clenched. His eyes flicked back to the board, as if hoping to find an error that wasn't there. Ellis didn't wait for an answer. He turned back to Zara. "We should talk after this. I have colleagues at MIT, Harvard, Stanford, people who would be very interested in meeting you." The room erupted. Zara's breath caught. MIT, Harvard, Stanford. The names felt unreal, like they belonged to another world, one where she wasn't fighting for scraps of knowledge, wasn't being set up to fail. But she hadn't failed. She had won. Calloway looked sick. The principal was already whispering to Dr. Ellis, probably trying to understand how their overlooked student had just proven them all wrong. Zara uncurled her fingers from the marker, her pulse still racing. The reality of what had just happened sank in. She turned to the students still staring at her, the ones who had laughed at her, whispered about her, dismissed her without a second thought. For years, she had been invisible. Not anymore. She picked up her backpack, set the marker down, and walked toward the exit. Jason caught up to her, grinning like he'd just seen a magic trick. "Zara, that was crazy. How did you—" She glanced at him, not stopping. "I paid attention." With that, she stepped out of the auditorium. The doors closed behind her, and somewhere, a door to something greater had just opened. Months later, the next few months were a whirlwind. 2 weeks after the exam, an official letter arrived from the National Math Scholars Program. Thick, expensive paper, her name printed in bold. Full scholarship, accelerated program, access to the best mentors in the country. For the first time, her future wasn't just a dream scribbled on diner receipts. It was real. On her last day at Lincoln High, the hallways that once felt suffocating now seemed too small. Calloway barely looked at her, his face unreadable, but she saw the way his grip tightened on his clipboard as she walked past. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was realization. It didn't matter. What mattered was the letter in her bag, the one taking her far beyond a school that had never seen her until it was too late. 1 year later, Zara sat in MIT's glass-walled study hall, staring at a new problem on her screen. Complex, beautiful, challenging. Around her were some of the brightest minds in the world. Students who had been prepped for this their whole lives, expected to be here. Yet as her fingers flew across the keyboard, breaking the problem apart, she realized something. She wasn't behind. She wasn't struggling. She belonged. A familiar voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Still making the rest of us look slow, huh?" She looked up. Jason, the same boy who had once watched in awe as she solved that impossible equation, sat across from her, flipping through notes, grinning like he still couldn't believe they were both here. "I don't make you look slow," she said, smirking. "You do that yourself." Jason laughed. Same Zara. And maybe she was. But the girl who used to study in stolen moments, who used to be ignored, erased, she was gone. In her place was someone who had fought for her seat at this table. Someone who refused to stay in the shadows. As she turned back to her screen, the equations waiting, she felt it again. That quiet certainty. She could solve anything. And she wasn't going to stop.